Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video, and in this video, for the 10th anniversary of the DLC episode to one of my all-time favorite games, I'll be talking about my thoughts on The Walking Dead Season 1's DLC, 400 Days. For some reason, I mean, I'll be straight up, this is a video I did not initially intend on making. I did obviously make a massive retrospective on Walking Dead Season 1, and I do plan on continuing on moving forward, but 400 Days is simply a game that never really clicked with me, and with it having so little importance to the rest of the series, I was initially just going to skip over it. However, I've had some people want me to talk about it, so I was like, okay, screw it. We'll make a short video here talking about my thoughts on 400 Days. And again, it's one that just really never clicked with me, even at the time. I mean, considering the fact that it is a Season 1 DLC, it has very little connection to Season 1. I mean, obviously, there are very little references to the events of that first game, but outside of that, this was more so released to set up the events of Season 2. But even then, it barely even does that. I mean, this is a DLC that just mostly feels pointless in the grand scheme of things. Now, I believe there was this intention at the beginning to make this a lot more impactful, though through rewrites of Season 2, those things were eventually written out. But again, that does still harm my overall opinions of this DLC, in that I really just don't care about most of what's going on here. Like, it does tell us the story of 5 new characters, all of which can have an appearance in Season 2 based on the choices you make here. And by appearance, I mean literally make cameos for 4 of them, while one other character is guaranteed to be part of the story anyway. So again, it's like, why does this exist? I mean, like, that being said, like, the stories that they tell in their own right here and the characters that are within them are fine for what it is, but they're all obviously very short stories, really underdeveloped. And again, playing through this entire DLC, again, them telling 5 stories over the course of it literally takes less than 2 hours to play through. So it really makes it so these stories don't really have much substance to them. I mean, I've always found 400 Days just be an extremely underwhelming DLC, especially with the context of how this affects Season 2, which is really not much at all. But again, we'll still be running through the DLC. It does start with this frame narrative showing this overrun pit stop where we do see a missing persons board that has the photos of the 5 playable characters here. And this essentially acts as a chapter select where you can choose the order of how you want to play these stories. Now, strangely, the order that they're here on the board is actually different from the actual chronological order, which is the order I'll be talking about them here. Though really, again, none of that really matters that much anyway. But anyway, let's start off with Vince's story, again, the one that takes place first. Before the outbreak, we do get this pretty cool introduction to Vince, where he is shown to be pulling the trigger on an unseen man, under the context of the man that he killed here supposedly doing something to his brother. Like, again, kind of making Vince kind of fit this, like, Lee mold of this criminal who isn't necessarily this bad guy. But again, we get this pointless choice at the very beginning of deciding where to hide his gun, which literally doesn't matter as he gets arrested anyway. But then the rest of the story takes place in the back of a prison bus 2 days after the zombie apocalypse, to where here we do get to know 2 of his fellow prisoners in Danny and Justin, where they commiserate about their lives before getting arrested. But the story progresses here through an altercation at the front of the bus, leading to the death of 2 prisoners, which will obviously lead to them being reanimated. And this ends up being a pretty drawn out scene of us having to grab the guard's shotgun and kill the walker. And then we get the final choice of the section, and us only being able to break out with one of Danny or Justin, and we have to pick which one's foot we blow off to be able to escape with the other. And again, this is obviously supposed to be this, like, really tense scene, but it's like, who cares? Who cares about Danny or Justin? Though the funny thing is, the choice you make here decides what Vince does at the end of the story. For some reason, where going with Justin leads to him going with Tavia at the end, while otherwise he decides to stay behind because, I guess. Yeah, it just feels like a really arbitrary choice here, to where it felt like something added in just to make it seem like your choices mattered. Though truth be told, I will say that this is probably one of the more notable stories of the bunch. I do feel like this moment of having to shoot one of your fellow prisoners' legs off being one of these choices that felt impactful at the time. So at least there's that, though they, again, don't really do much with it. And really, that's really Vince as a whole. I feel like Vince is a character that could have been interesting. He could have had this, like, Lee-style redemption arc, but instead they just don't do anything with him. Next up, we're moving on to Wyatt. which this happens on day 41 of the outbreak, where here we see Wyatt and Eddie driving away from a guy shooting at them. And it starts with this big action sequence of you shooting back at the car. They're like, none of this really matters. You escape anyway. And really, Wyatt and Eddie here both really come off as these overly generic, like stoner-esque characters that, again, don't really feel like they have much substance to them. But either way, they pull over after having run over a body, that body turning out to be Bennett, the prison guard from Vince's story, which is like, who cares? Here we see them having an argument over if they should go check it out, to which most of the time I end up playing this. Eddie is the one that ends up going, though there is a way to get Wyatt to go as well. Though if Eddie is the one to go, this raider will end up attacking you and Wyatt will end up escaping, which will be the end to this story. While otherwise, you have the option to save Bennett, but that doesn't really matter, does it? But in that case, Eddie will end up abandoning you. But this is again another situation where if Wyatt stayed in the car, he'll go with Tavia. Well, otherwise, he has to be convinced to go, which is like, why? Why does this change anything? I guess entire DLC is so pointless. Whatever, moving on to Russell's story, which is day 184. Again, a decent time skip from the last one. This one does end up having a reference to the original game where a car will end up passing Russell and you can decide to hide, where in doing so, you'll end up finding Doug or Carly's corpse there, which, I mean, at least it's something. But either way, the man in the car will stop for you anyway, that person being Nate, who is essentially the guy that attacked Wyatt, because I guess that's some connective tissue that needed to be here. But here we do have a conversation between Nate and Russell, with Nate really just coming off as kind of a dick, though Russell as a whole in this DLC is kind of just fine. I mean, he's kind of this generic younger character that's kind of in over his head, but he's at least somewhat likable here, though here we do see Nate really just messing with Russell. Though this all ends up leading to him to the truck stop, the one that we do see at the beginning of the game, where someone from inside ends up shooting at them, leading to this action sequence of having to sneak our way into the station, or us having to sneak our way to cover, and again, all this is just kind of boring. But along the way, we do find a walker that ends up being a reanimated Clyde, another guard from Vince's story, because I guess they thought that was important. But here we can kill it here, or if we don't kill it, it'll end up showing up in Bonnie's story, because that definitely matters. But eventually we end up entering the cafe, finding out that the shooter was just an old guy that was trying to protect his wife. And here we see Nate wanting to kill him for shooting at them, where we are given the choice from Russell of whether or not to stay with Nate. Though either way, Nate will kill the couple anyway, which kind of makes this entire choice irrelevant anyway. Especially considering I don't believe this choice ends up affecting whether or not he goes to Tavia at the end, where I believe that's entirely up to Tavia's dialogue options at the very end. So again, all this is just entirely pointless. Next up, moving on to Bonnie, day 220, where Bonnie obviously is the character that ends up being the most important to Season 2, being the only one that's actually a main character in Season 2. The one that was always going to be a main character in Season 2, which makes you question what was the point in introducing her in this DLC, especially considering nothing from this DLC ends up really mattering to her character beyond this. By the way, here we see her talking to Leland, where they're obviously flirting around, making you think that they're significant others, until the other person in their group ends up arriving, that being Dee, Leland's wife, which again sets this up as Bonnie being Leland's mistress, though again it's like, who cares? By the way, you talk to Dee, obviously it's supposed to be this awkward conversation because she knows that Bonnie's hooking up with Leland, and it's all at least this big argument later on, though that ends up being cut short by them being attacked by another group that has us running away from them, leading to this action sequence of us running away and us having to weirdly navigate through a cornfield, which I always found strange. But eventually this has Bonnie hiding behind a tractor, where she ends up hearing someone approaching her, forcing us to hit that person with a piece of rebar, killing them, only for it to be revealed that that person was Dee. Where in her dying moments, you can tell her what you really feel about Leland, which again, who cares? And here Leland ends up arriving. We can tell him the truth or lie about what happened to Dee. Again, another thing, doesn't matter to anything, outside of deciding if Leland goes with Bonnie or not, which doesn't affect anything. As again, no matter what, Bonnie goes with Tavia. It's literally impossible for her not to go with Tavia. And again, none of these things have an effect on our story in Season 2, so all of this is entirely pointless. By the way, this takes us to the final story, that being Shells. And Shell's story is actually the longest one of the bunch, it actually having a time skip in between it, with us starting it off on day 236, where Shell and her younger sister Becca are part of this group. And Shell and Becca are really these characters that I never really got much out of. I felt like they come off as this really generic older sister, younger sister dynamic, not really bring too much new to the table. And you get some downtime with the characters here that just seeming like a normal day. We meet the leader of the group in Roman, and also Stephanie, who comes off as a pleasant enough figure here. Also, we end up finding out that part of this group is the remnants of Vernon's group from season 1. Another reference there, the one that, again, doesn't really matter, though we do learn that Vernon has died since then, which, thank God. This eventually leads to us finding out that the group has caught a guy who is trying to steal their supplies, to which we have this discussion over what the group should do with him, either killing him or letting him go, with obviously the vote being split, with Shell being the deciding vote, because obviously, though most time I play this game, obviously I do decide to just release him, though this does end up affecting which half of the group is happy with you. But after this cuts to 3 weeks later, where Shelly and Becca are playing cards in their RV, talking about this decision, where if they had killed the man, we get talk about how this decision had changed the group, while otherwise we find out that the group got attacked within that week, resulting in the death of Boyd, which, what a shame, but obviously playing off the ramifications of your previous choice, that really doesn't mean anything. But either way, this leads to Roman having taken more control of the group. This is where we do learn that Becca had sneaked out of the camp, and Roman ends up knocking on the door immediately afterwards, making us worry about if he's here to do something to Becca. This will lead to the revelation that Stephanie has been caught stealing food and trying to escape, and for some reason they now say that Shell has to be the one to execute Stephanie for this, for melodrama. But this is where we get the last decision of the episode, where he can just drive away with Becca or actually decide to execute Stephanie, with Becca encouraging Shell to go through with the execution, which I did feel like was weird characterization for her. But again, none of this actually matters though this is another situation where deciding to leave in the RV does lead to Shell and Becca joining Tavia, while otherwise they have to be convinced by Tavia. And that brings us to day 400, or again, almost 150 days have passed since the latest story, which makes me question, why 400 days? This brings us to the epilogue, where we do get the reveal that it was Tavia that was at the board, who is this new character that, again, is at least somewhat present in season 2. But we find out that she is part of a community that is out looking for people to join them. And we have Tavia approaching this group's campsite, where it's revealed that all the characters that we just experienced their stories of are now together as a group somehow. That isn't really explained how they came together, but whatever, I guess. But along the way, we do get Tavia talking to a voice on the radio who tells her that use her best judgment when deciding who to bring with her, and that we only take good people. And really, again, like, this all seems pleasant enough. This seems like a solid society, which is weird considering we cut to season 2 when this is Carver's group. This guy who is this authoritarian dictator, probably the most brutal antagonist the Walking Dead Telltale has ever seen. So again, all this is just strange. And again, I'm pretty sure it's because of all the rewrites that happened with season 2, but none of this actually makes sense with context of season 2's story. But either way, Tavia approaches the group, where there's this short conversation with her offering to bring them in. And again, who goes with you is dependent on the choices made earlier, though Tavia does have some dialogue options that can help convince some other people around, particularly mentioning the concepts of finding friends or family. And the DLC ends here with the group burning the photographs that were on the board for some reason. Again, this is all just such a nothing DLC. Again, just straight up, like, I don't think the stories on their own are bad. I think conceptually this could have been a really interesting DLC if it did have this proper connection to season 2, but it just doesn't. Again, all that ends up happening in season 2 that has a connection to this is these little 5 to 10 second cameos from these characters when you're in Carver's community. Where the only one of any significance is Bonnie, who does join your group and is in half of season 2, but even then, it doesn't play off of what happened in 400 days really at all. Which is what makes this DLC a really strange one, and one that, while I have played it multiple times just for like completion's sake and playing all the Walking Dead games, it never really felt like an integral part of the story. And just feels like a lot of wasted potential, considering there are some potentially solid characters here. It's just that they do absolutely nothing with them. But with that, again, those are my thoughts on 400 Days. Again, a DLC that I just think is not that good, especially under the modern context. But again, I did want to make this video because I am going to be doing videos on every Walking Dead season at some point, so might as well get this one out of the way. Now, again, I will be doing a season 2 retrospective that will probably be coming out at the end of the year. That'll be season 2's 10-year anniversary, so stay tuned for that. But for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.